Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on a practical path to climate disclosure, introducing Disclosure Kit. I'm Nicole Sullivan, your host, and joining me today is Nicky Andrews, our Principal Sustainability Specialist and guru on climate-related disclosures. Just a little housekeeping before I start. So you're in listen-only mode for this webinar, so we avoid background noises. We would love to hear from you though, so if you have any questions at any time, please type them in the Q&A chat at the bottom of the panel and we will go through them at the end. Please do pop them in at any time. We love to see those questions starting to trickle through. If we run out of time to answer all your questions, we will get in touch afterwards. Please don't use the chat function as those questions don't get saved. This webinar is being recorded and we'll share it on our website soon. So with that, let's get started. First, we'd like to understand where you're at when it comes to climate-related disclosures. So I'm just finding my poll to launch for you because we'd really like to hear from you where you're at. So this is a multiple choice and multiple answer poll. So click on the ones where you've started working on areas of climate-related disclosure. Great to see those answers trickling in. I'll show you those results shortly once people have got a bit more of a chance to put them in. But what I'm seeing so far is about 80% of you are working on Scope 1 and 2 emissions, but the percentage drops fairly significantly after that. So just 5 more seconds and I'll close that off just to quickly submit the last ones. Okay, I'll share the results with you. So what you'll be able to see on your screen is that, we're down to 76% now working on Scope 1 and 2 emissions, and then we've dropped down to a maximum of 36% on the other items. Interestingly, when we get to things like transition planning, we're only down at 8%. So there's still plenty to learn and explore at this stage. So that's really quite exciting.
And thank you to the honesty of the person who said they just don't even know where to start.
Absolutely. And you know what? I often talk to people who really don't know what they need to do with climate-related disclosures yet. They're yet to get started. I was talking to someone just recently who thought that they pretty much had it covered because they're doing their Scope 1 and 2 emissions. And I felt quite bad for them because I know that's really only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what we need to do. So, Nicky, what are some of the common misconceptions about climate-related disclosures?
Yeah, so definitely, like you said, thinking that, it is all about carbon. And when I say carbon, I'm talking emissions. And as we saw in the poll there, like a lot of people have got emissions under control. It's something that businesses have been thinking about for a while. So that's one of the easy ones when it comes to climate-related disclosures. But it is a lot more than just emissions. There's a number of different things that you need to address, and it's thinking a lot broader, more about your value chain and your business and how climate is going to affect you. So I'll share my screen with you now and just explain a little more.
Sounds great.
Yes, so I think more important than the emission piece, there is 4 elements to the disclosures, but the big piece, the thing that takes the most time and resources is understanding what your climate-related risks and opportunities are. And understanding that requires you to consider both the physical impacts of climate change. So we're talking about your extreme weather events, which we consider to be an acute impact, or the chronic, which is more like the changes in climate over time, the increasing temperatures, rising sea levels, but also those transition impacts. What happens as we as a society transition to a lower carbon economy? Are we doing that quickly or are we doing that slowly? And how would that affect your business? And so what that looks like in practice is different impacts like what I've got here. So this on your left side here is the physical impacts, the things that could be happening physically, and how could that affect you? But not just you. You have to consider, like, how does it affect your value chain, your supply chain, and disruptions to your business? And then the transition risks and opportunities. And these are things like changing requirements in terms of compliance, your clients and customers changing attitudes and expectations of you, low carbon technologies, disruptive technologies that changes things on how you work, and targets. And I think one important thing to mention there is that it's not just the risk side of things, but there are also opportunities that can be uncovered through this process, and that's can be a really valuable exercise to undertake as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But I mean that these things, they don't just apply to business, right? Because
Yeah,
like when I
absolutely.
bought the house a little while ago now, but when I bought the house that we're living in now, I had to check what the flood level is near me because I'm on fairly flat ground. And actually, what the flood level is now might be quite different to what the flood level is by the time we finished living in that house. Or
Yeah.
also, if there's a cyclone, am I going to lose my roof? Like
Yep.
some really simple things that, yeah, sure, this relates to business, but actually, it can actually strike in a very personal level as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really something about understanding resilience. And I mean, when
Yeah.
it comes to your house, you should be checking whether you're on a floodplain, but if you're not checking, your insurance company is. And so, you want to be thinking about this, and a business wants to think about this because others around them, such as insurance and their ability to access finance, they care about these things. And so you need to be on top of them. So just coming back to your point about what is the disclosures, the main disclosure requirements, what we just talked about there, that sits in strategy, identifying climate risks and opportunities. Your GHG emissions, they sit in your metrics and targets. But then there's a broader governance piece that's all about what is the management and oversight of this process each year. And the risk management is a bit more of a description of how do you go about this process of identifying your climate risks and opportunities. And again, who is ultimately responsible for that, and how well does your climate risk management align to your enterprise risk management. Yeah, and so as I said, it's both about risks, and it's also about looking for opportunities. And I think that's the one that we've noticed, especially in the companies that have already started disclosing. The opportunity piece is not necessarily significant, but I think it matters, and it can build that resilience of a company.
Yeah, and those opportunities, like we're talking about climate related opportunities here, but those
Mm,
opportunities can actually extend well beyond climate. So, for example, if we're working on our climate related risks and opportunities right now, that might cause us to develop a more resilient global supply chain that can withstand regional shocks like cyclones or heat waves or floods that affect our ability to get feedstock from a particular area, for example.
yeah,
But then
exactly.
if we have that more resilient supply chain, that could be helping us right now, couldn't it? Because we've got this global fuel crisis. And if we have a diversified supply chain, nice secure contracts, that could actually be helping us right now with getting
Yeah.
the fuel supplies that we need.
Yep, exactly. And so that resilience is really important. And like you said, it's not just going to affect us for climate.
Yep. So for the past few years, Nikki, you and our team have been working on climate related disclosures in New Zealand.
Hmm.
And while those standards are slightly different, they're still based on those same international standards that the Australian requirements have been built from by
Hmm.
the AASB. So what have we learnt from that experience?
Yep. Yeah. So I think one of the big ones was starting early. I think people don't actually realize at times, how much time is required to really do this and do it well. It also requires like a lot of engagement in the business to understand, like to have different people in the business involved in the process, to make sure that they understand what their responsibilities are. And so you need to get started early. And what we see is the people who do this really well started before the regulations required it of them. They started
Mm,
as like a practice round, and that made it a lot easier to actually to do it once regulation required it of them, because they were already well versed and understood the challenges and the areas, the gaps in their processes that they needed to close in order to get a better disclosure together. And then you also just breaking it down through these four elements that you can see on the screen here. So you got your governance and your strategy, and that's an opportunity to improve your processes and your systems. But then the really meaty piece of the work is that was your governance, your risk management. The strategy is that really tricky part that requires time to work through those different risks. There's research elements there, and what we've heard from a lot of clients is that's where they tend to want to engage someone externally to help them, because it is a complex subject. And generally speaking, a lot of companies, they don't have climate experts in-house, and they're not entirely sure how to go about identifying those risks and opportunities. Yeah, and so we've also started doing it in Australia, and what we're seeing there is this financial outcomes is a real challenge, because not only do we need to say what our climate risks and opportunities are, but we also need to say what the consequences are to the business in terms of putting a dollar figure on it, and your exposure, like how much of your business actually exposed to this risk. And that is something that people haven't really been comfortable with yet, but that is something that ASIC is expecting more of. And it's also really important to make it real for a company, because once they have connect finance and financial outcomes, that's when it becomes real, and that they get the buy-in that they need from those top levels. They need to understand that why are we doing this?
Yeah, so important, right? Nothing is really real to a business until we've got that buy-in. So
Yes.
we have learnt a lot through that process then.
Yeah.
What have you seen of how that process works that can actually add true value for business? And what do you have to do for a disclosure, or in that disclosure process, for that to add that value?
Yeah. So just highlighting here on the screen a few of the benefits that we've seen from doing it, and doing it well. And I think the big one that I always come back to and have mentioned, we've both discussed already, is that becoming more resilient. It's only through going through this process and understanding your exposure to climate, and really doing that kind of broad view of the value chain, that you realize there are things that maybe are not yet being addressed and that need to be considered. Maybe there's nothing that needs to be done right in this moment, but the planning and the monitoring and everything needs to be in place so that you can see if the situation is changing and to know how you might respond. But aside from that, there's a lot of other positive benefits. So you've got your brand and your reputation benefits of being someone who's doing this. Whether or not regulation is requiring it, people are really interested to see this and how you're addressing climate risks, but also how you're helping to mitigate climate change through your emissions reductions. You're reducing your risks by identifying them and creating those transition plans. You're reducing your costs because you are hopefully putting in place the right type of controls to avoid significant financial impacts. You're building relationships through your supply chain, as you've mentioned already, Nicole, with building that stronger, resilient supply chain, that you need to be working with your suppliers closely to understand that, also understand what their climate risks are as well, and supporting each other on that. And it's also just something in terms of engagement within your wider team, being part of that process. People care about this stuff more and more, and so they want to work for that company that really cares about this topic and does it well. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, access to finance and insurance, those two are becoming more and more prevalent, that your financial institutions and your insurances, they are looking very closely at that exposure, and they want to see that you are managing it well in order to be able to continue to access finance and insurance.
So this is great for businesses that need to disclose.
Mhm.
What about businesses that don't have to disclose? Why would they want
Mm.
to enter into this process then? Is that linked to these sort of concepts too?
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. So you don't need to be a group 1, 2, or 3 company in order to want to build the resilience of your business. And also, you may find that if you are a supplier, a key customer for a group 1 or 2, 2 or 3 company, that they are needing this from you as well. So there's might be another benefit there of starting this process, so that you can answer their questions and give them the confidence that they need. And as we mentioned, you can also just be doing it to start early. You might see that down the track you will have to disclose. And so getting this process started now and understanding like how much work is required and how much engagement and things you need to do will mean that it's a much more comfortable process once it does become regulated.
Yeah, yeah. So I guess if you're in the supply chain of somebody else who needs to disclose, they want to know that you have a climate resilient supply chain all the
Yeah,
way along. So yeah, that makes
exactly.
sense. These are pretty big concepts, though.
Hmm.
What challenges are we seeing companies experiencing when they're trying to do their disclosures?
Yeah, so I think not really understanding what needs to be done, as to your very first point there, a lot of people are still thinking carbon and carbon emissions is like the number one thing that these
Mm,
disclosures require, which is, if you're only doing that, you're not even like covering 20% of the overall workload of what it is
yeah.
that you really need to do. So really getting familiar with what it needs to be included, especially in that
Hmm.
first disclosure. After the first
Mm,
disclosure, it gets a little bit easier because you don't have to
hmm.
start again. You just refresh and review. So that's one. And then also just not being prepared for that limited assurance process. So they may have gone through those steps. And what we've seen with some clients is that they've gone through the process of identifying climate risks and identifying what's material and transition planning. Then they speak to the auditors and they say, well, what was your process? How did you do that? What was the decision behind why that was material and that one wasn't? And they don't have enough of an audit trail or decision logs
Mm,
or something that kind of shows that there was a clear process of how they did it and it wasn't just kind of dependent on the mood of the day. And they have to backtrack a little bit to actually be able to justify that position. So
mm.
making sure you've got all that information in the background, that doesn't necessarily have to all get into the disclosure, but you've got it on record to make that assurance process much smoother. And then the other challenge is we've been told by a lot of clients that it just costs a lot of money. And your group one companies, they might be able to absorb that. But as you go into group two and group three, it just becomes quite an expensive exercise to get the help that they need to complete a disclosure.
Well, there's a fairly logical next question, which is how can we help with that, Nikki?
Yes. So, given that we've had quite a number of years working in New Zealand and now Australia, helping clients work on this, we've realized that there is a need for a solution that is affordable but helps people work through this process. And that is called Disclosure Kit. So, we've been working on this product that basically lays out the steps for you. Of those four elements of the regulation, but splits it into 6 modules. And then those 6 modules, once you worked through all of those, they put together and they have all the records of the information that you need to put into your final disclosure. So the way that that system works, if it'll let me, oh, gone too far. I've lost that slide. That's all right. But basically, each one of these modules is got a guide. So it explains to you what it is that this section requires, what you need to do, who you need to engage, and then it has an action log. And the action log is where you record all of that information. So when you're getting into your strategy section, the strategy is giving you a guide on how do you go through and gives you examples of all of those different climate impacts that you might need to address, and then you work through the step by steps to understand like from that information, what have you already seen in your business that is potential risk and how might that risk change over a number of different climate scenarios. And then it basically, by the time you get to the carbon emissions, also mentioned we do have a scope 1 and 2 calculator within there too. So if you have not
Mm,
started anything in terms of carbon, that gives you that first stepping stone to how to start measuring scope 1 and 2 emissions. And then when you get to the disclosure template, we've created a document that covers the requirements of the regulation and gives you examples of what kind of information you should include in each section, but also redirects you back to these 6 modules and says, if you go back to the climate governance section 1, you will find the information you need to complete this party disclosure. So you've got all the background information as your records, it's your audit trail, and then you've got something to get you started on that first disclosure as well.
so I think you can see that second slide now on the screen, Nikki. Is that right?
Oh,
I think I've just put it up. Yes. So that second slide that shows a bit more about the detail in the kit is now there.
yeah.
That's
Thank
all
you.
right.
Yes, so yeah, there you can see it a little bit more detail, but those action logs, they tend to either be Word documents where you're recording your processes, or Excel where you're going to be putting in a little bit more detail into tables of step-by-step process of identifying risks and opportunities. And then, as you can see there on the right, it's designed as a self-serve kit in terms of we can give that to you and you just work through it. And it comes with 2 hours of support, which is basically an opportunity to ask questions. But then we have a number of different support packages available. So if you think I need more help with this, then we can give you a slightly larger support program, or we could run the workshops for you to identify climate risks. If that's an area that you're just like, I don't know how to do that, then we can customize a package where we help you run through those more complex subjects and leave the governance, the carbon emissions to you and to manage internally. So we can do it in quite a customized way depending on the needs of the company.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love that it's so flexible, that there's just so much guidance there, but it's been written in really plain English, which I love because we're not all experts. And then just being able to take it at your own pace. And even if you're a relatively new entrant into this, it starts from the beginning, so you can build up into it. That's great, Nikki. So in the end, it does need to make good business sense to do this. And we've
Mm-hmm.
talked a little bit about this already. But what other benefits have you seen with clients?
Yeah, well, we've been working with a client recently, and it was a really great moment going through some of these workshops. We'd been through a few processes with them already. We'd looked at the climate risks, we'd looked at opportunities, we'd done the scenario analysis, and we'd worked out, so how did these things change over time? But it was only actually in the transition planning that I felt like we really got that moment from the client and their leadership team who we were working with. Basically, they had one of their key customers expected of them that they set themselves a net zero target by 2040. And they we went through this question of, okay, we have changing expectations as a result of climate, changing client expectations about what you're doing for climate. And we talked about this net zero target. And through the monitoring stage, we said, well, what happens if you don't meet that target? Like, what happens in 2040 if you don't meet that target? Do you lose that customer? Do you no longer become a preferred customer? And they didn't know, and so they weren't sure, and it became this realization: this is a huge customer for us. If we don't know what the outcome is, if we can't actually achieve this
Mm,
target that we've agreed to set, we need to have a closer engagement with that customer and understand the implications. And it sounds maybe a little bit obvious, but sometimes these things are only uncovered that way. I mean, if you think about anyone who's set themselves a science-based target, ask yourself, what is the science-based target initiative going to do if I don't meet it? And a lot of people can't answer that question. So you
mm,
think, well, we're setting it because that's what they wanted, but what happens if it doesn't happen? And that's why that transition plan is a great way of understanding how we're going to continue to monitor something that we've seen as material and understand when
mm.
things are changing, when the triggers, and make sure that we are prepared.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so very interesting. And it was really fascinating that you got to the transition planning stage when our initial poll said only 8% of people have got to the transition planning stage yet
Mm,
before that real, oh my goodness, this is really meaningful for our business hit.
yeah,
So if you're plugging away in the early parts, you may not have actually hit where the rubber really hits the road yet. So, oh, fascinating.
yeah.
All right. Please do pop any questions that you have in the Q&A box. I've got a couple of questions that I've prepared for Nikki, so I'm going to start with
Hmm.
those. But if you have anything, we'd love to be asking your questions rather than mine, because I can ask her later. Nikki, what I'd like to know is what has surprised you as you've worked through this topic personally? You've done a lot in this area now.
Yeah, we've been working on it for a few years now. I don't know if it's necessarily a surprise, but it's been really interesting experience talking to customers and seeing the different ways that climate can impact an
Mm,
operation. And it's so broad, and every customer has been different in terms of the different impacts. And even though we're here as an external consultant helping them, it's through the expertise of talking to the right people in the business and understanding the way that their operations work that actually becomes apparent that the way that climate can affect us.
Mm.
And that's both positive and negative. We've seen clients where actually there is some very big opportunities coming out of climate change, which feels a little bit unusual, but it's true that, the world is changing, and sometimes businesses can find new product offerings and things that can actually meet the changing needs of our society. And also, I think the thing that surprises us is making sure that people understand that they need to consider that wider value chain. Like when we're talking carbon
Mm.
emissions, everyone thinks about, what do I have operational control or financial control over?
Mm.
And that is the boundary that they draw. But when it comes to climate, we have to go really broad into that value chain, because if your value chain is impacted, then you're impacted, and it's going to have a financial impact for you potentially as well, and a disruption at the very least. So to make sure that they're keeping that really broad lens.
Thanks, Kim, for your questions. And Nikki, what range of drivers are you seeing across the different companies that you work with? For example,
Mm.
it's mandated, or our business leadership sees this as important regardless of whether it's mandated, or
hmm
our insurance costs will be lower if we do this. So what are these business drivers?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the regulation is a huge driver, but beyond that, it does depend on the motivation of the company of whether or not they have that buy-in from the top leadership, and that's helping push this agenda. We see also, customers, their key customers, they're asking more questions. And of course, depending on exposure, then, as we mentioned, their insurance and the realization that they may either have extremely high insurance premiums or can no longer get insurance can
Mm.
also be a significant driver of needing to not only identify but actually set those transition plans and understand and communicate how they were going to address these challenges.
Yeah, absolutely. Nikki has asked, are there any publicly available strategies or plans that you recommend as examples of best practice?
Interesting. Especially in Australia, we're only just seeing the first few climate disclosures coming out. And because there's the group ones on the 31st of March, we first started to publish. So I don't know if I could point to any one particular company, but what is interesting is that a number of the assurance companies, such as EY and PwC, have published reports that have done an
Mm.
analysis of the
Yes.
first round of disclosures and what they think of them, and some just general analytics of, what is the average number of risks that are being disclosed, and, how many companies are putting out opportunities, and just trying to give a bit of a view of like, what do the first round of disclosures look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't see any other questions coming through at the moment. Nikki, given time, I might wrap it up there. But thank you so much for sharing your expertise with all of us. I feel
Yeah.
like a minnow in this pond with you, so thank you so much for that. So we will have more webinars coming up very soon. For those who may be in the Sydney area, in just under 3 weeks' time, our CEO Barbara and I are presenting a course helping people to understand how to work with life cycle assessment, not to do it, but to be able to work with LCA and environmental product declarations as well. But we'll let you go at that. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to see you again at another thinkstep-anz webinar really soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.
We have many more webinar replays on a whole host of sustainability topics. You can check them out on our website and our YouTube channel.